Andrew Yang did a media tour, and I'm happy he's getting more attention now because they treat him in a very similar way to how they treat Bernie. They just ignore him wantonly. Like they'll put things on screen where it's like, it'll show the people polling high and it's like the top sixth and he's ranked fifth, but they just exclude him and put in people polling lower than him. That's happened multiple times. I mean, it was really egregious in many respects. But it seems like now he's getting on the networks more, which again is a good thing. I'm happy he's, being treated at least somewhat more fairly than he was before. Not saying that everything's all hunky-dory now, but at least now he's getting some airtime. But now that he's being treated seriously, he's getting vetted a little more. And so there were some instances of decent questions that he was asked. So this just happened, and he was asked about his healthcare plan. You're going to see two separate clips here, but I think they're both important, for their own reasons. So let's take a look at how he handled these questions on his healthcare plan, and then we'll discuss.
Joining me now is Andrew Yang, Democratic candidate for president. It's good to have you.
Chris, great to see you. Happy holidays. Thank you for having me on.
Okay, so I want to talk about healthcare. This has been obviously the subject of a lot of debate. You've talked about the debates, you've talked about on the campaign trail, but I'm slightly confused about your position. The first ad that your campaign ran was with your wife and talking about your son, and she says that you would fight for Medicare for all. It's been sort of a part of the platform, along with the freedom dividend, which we'll talk about. You recently put out a healthcare, some language on your website where you say you support the spirit of Medicare for all, which leaves me slightly confused about what actually programmatically you would want to see happen.
Well, what Medicare for all means to many Americans is universal health care that's high quality and low or zero cost. And that is exactly what I'm championing. We need to provide health care to all Americans, but I would not get rid of all private insurance plans immediately because millions of Americans are on those plans, enjoy those plans, in many cases negotiated for those plans in lieu of higher wages. The goal of the government has to be to demonstrate that we can outcompete the private insurance plans and squeeze them out of the market over time.
So is that something along the lines of positions taken by Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, and a few others in which there would be essentially the availability of buying into Medicare for people?
Yes, it is quite similar, but our plan has lower minimal cost for many Americans and then co-pays just so that you have a little bit of skin in the game. So it is similar, but we think that we've improved upon some of the other proposals that are out there.
Okay, I want to turn to your healthcare plan because you've just released a new healthcare plan, and I'm a little bit confused about where you stand. First, I want to play clips from two of your ads where you talk about healthcare.
We need to move towards a Medicare-for-all system where every American has access to quality and affordable services.
His ideas are a blueprint for a new way forward, a healthcare system with Medicare for all.
But I've looked at your healthcare plan. In fact, I've got it right here. And this plan does not call for Medicare for all. In fact, it doesn't even have a public option. So why the dissonance here?
We need to move towards universal health care that's high quality and nearly cost-free for Americans around the country. But reality is we have millions of Americans who are on private insurance right now, and taking those plans away from them very quickly would be untenable for many, many Americans. To me, the goal of the government has to be to demonstrate that we can outcompete private plans and then push them out of the market over time. And that's what we're proposing.
But I'm confused. Your ad is explicit. Your ad says Medicare for all. Your plan is not Medicare for all. It's not even Medicare for some, because in your plan, there's not even a public option.
Our plan is to expand a universal health care system to all Americans. Medicare for all is not the name of a bill. Medicare for all is universal health care for all Americans.
But Medicare for all is Medicare for all, right? I mean...
Well, our health care plan would be based on Medicare and expanding it over time. to more and more Americans. You lower the eligibility age, and then you make it widely accessible.
Okay, I didn't see that in your plan, but
Andrew, just be upfront with the fact that you don't support Medicare for all, because you don't. You know, at least in the case of somebody like Joe Biden, he says that he doesn't support it. He's like, no, I don't agree with that, and I'm not going to go in that direction. I want to like mildly expand Obamacare. Okay, Joe, I massively disagree with you, and I'm going to come after you, but you're being upfront with your position. Now, Andrew Yang quite clearly does not support Medicare for all, but he's still trying to like weirdly hang on to that marketing angle of it. But that's really, really disingenuous. So now listen, Andrew Yang's a smart guy. Does he think that he can make a case for a different approach to healthcare that can convince people? I'm sure he does. But Andrew, do that. Do that. Because this is unacceptable, man. I mean, there was another clip that went viral of Andrew Yang being interviewed where somebody asked him, like, okay, so are you admitting that you want to use the term Medicare for all while not signing on to the actual bill, Medicare for all? And Andrew's response was, yes. Andrew, that's not a thing. That's not a thing. Can't be like, oh, I support Medicare for all, but the actual bill, I don't support that. That's what Tim Ryan did. Tim Ryan signed on to support H.R. 676, Medicare for all. And then when Cenk Uygur asked him face-to-face, would you vote for Medicare for all if President Bernie Sanders is in office? Tim Ryan said, no. Kamala did the same thing. Kamala was the first co-sponsor of Bernie's Medicare for all bill in the Senate. H.R. 676 is the House version. In the Senate. And then she just totally changed her position on it. She signed on to the bill, and then during on the debate stage, all of a sudden, she backed off of it and came up with her own healthcare plan, which was not Medicare for all. So, it's not okay to say, I'm going to use this as a marketing scheme, but then come up with my own plan. No, come up with your own plan, name it your own thing, and then argue for it. Because that's intellectually honest. Now, again, I'll still come out here and disagree with you, Andrew, because I'm a big proponent of Medicare for all. But at least if you label your different plan something else, well, then I don't have to come out here and get all worked up and chastise you for not being upfront and honest about your plan and being incredibly disingenuous with this. Your ads explicitly stated Medicare for all. And then you went on to explicitly state, I'm going to use the name Medicare for all, but not agree to the bill. And he also said, like, oh, me and my campaign, and this is an older clip, but he said, me and my campaign, there was a debate and a disagreement going on behind closed doors. Like, what does it actually mean to support Medicare for all? And apparently, Andrew Yang's position effectively is that, like, well, anything that gets us to universal coverage, we can call Medicare for all. It's an actual bill. There's a couple versions of the bill, but it is an actual bill. H.R. 676 was the original in 2017 and 2018 in the House. Now there's a newer version. There's the Pramila Jayapal version. There's the Bernie Sanders version. There's slight variations on Medicare for all, but it is not up in the air, airy-fairy, call anything you want, Medicare for all. That's not what it is. So that's really not good, okay? And I'm saying this as kindly as I can. I'm sorry, Yang Gang. Listen, and people know this. I will come out on this show, and when I agree with you, I will say I agree with you, and I will give you credit. As I did very clearly when Andrew Yang came out for decriminalizing all drugs, when Andrew Yang took the position that he did on sex work. There are plenty of things where I give him credit when he deserves it. There are areas where I don't think he deserves credit because I don't agree with him. Now, you can disagree with me, that's fine, but I'm going to explain where I disagree with him. And you could like it or not like it. I don't really care. So, I disagree with him on, he's not for a living wage. He's not for a $15 minimum wage. Now, I get it. His people say, oh, we have a different way of getting there through UBI. I still think we should have a living wage law. Yes, I'm open to the conversation about other ways to get money to people who need money. So I'm for universal basic income, but I'm also for a living wage. He's not for a living wage. Now we know he's very clearly not for Medicare for all. So just say it. Just say you're not for it. As long as he stops using the label, well, then half of my commentary here criticizing him is gone. I'm still going to disagree with him, and I'm still going to call him out, but at least I won't have to do this whole thing, this whole spiel where I'm like, dude, just be honest about the fact you don't support it. He then goes on to say, well, he wouldn't totally get rid of private plans because they're, quote, untenable. Now, I will add the caveat here that some versions of the Medicare-for-all bill, I think it might be all versions of the Medicare-for-all bill, allow for supplemental private insurance, so extra. But to say you wouldn't get rid of the private plans because it's untenable and because, some unions fought hard for their plans, that's the Joe Biden argument. That's what that is. And by the way, many unions now support Medicare for all. So to use the unions as a cop-out is not a good argument. And it's also not a good argument that, as he's used previously, it's untenable, or as he said in the past, disruptive. Who cares? Who cares? And it was really disruptive when we, allowed women to vote. It was really disruptive when we ended segregation. This was all really disruptive. When we ended prohibition, very disruptive. Just because something is disruptive or something you think is untenable doesn't mean that it's not something that should be done. We have to discuss that thing on its own merits. And that's not what's being done when he says that. What I would say to Andrew Yang is, some people negotiated for their plans and they got really good plans and, in lieu of wages. Well, what I would say is their wages would go up if you have the Medicare for all bill. If you take healthcare away from being a burden on the individual companies. And this is an argument that Andrew Yang used to use back when he was more, most of his commentary was more in support of Medicare for all. He was like, this actually helps businesses because it gets healthcare off of their backs as well. And it makes people moving from job to job a hell of a lot easier. Now some people stay in a job they don't want to be in because they need their healthcare. So in some ways, companies use it as leverage over employees. So in some ways, the companies like it. In other ways, they don't like it because it's expensive for them to pay for the healthcare for people. But listen, the fact that some people have those plans and they like those plans, what I would say to Andrew is, who would you say you can't have a gold plan to? Because let's say those plans are the gold plans or the nicest plans or the top of the line plans. Who doesn't deserve a gold plan? The way healthcare works should be, you're sick, you get help. That's it. That's the end of it. That's it. The idea that, we're going to give you choice as to who's going to be the mafia middleman ripping you off. No, how about we get rid of the mafia middleman that's getting in between you and your doctor for no reason? By the way, under our current system, we have less freedom of choice. Why? Well, I'm sure you know, because it's with my health insurance too. I can't pick whatever doctor I want because some are in-network and some are out-of-network. To defend the private insurance system that we have right now to any degree is to some extent defend the lack of freedom of choice in picking your doctor. So, he says it's untenable or it's disruptive to get rid of the private health insurance companies. I don't care. That's not a strike against it. Sometimes disruptive things are good things. And also, by the way, we have to stop the up to 45,000 deaths every year for lack of basic health care, 32,000 to 45,000. And, he goes on to admit there, he says, well, the government would need to compete with the private health insurance companies. Okay, but then you're also admitting that you say you support Medicare for all. Well, you describe there as more of a public option thing, but what he wrote doesn't say Medicare for all or public option. He says, he uses throughout all of his commentary there, things that I have accurately described in the past as weasel words. Now, for all the Yang Gangers out there who might be mad at me at this moment, just understand, I've done segments on this in the past before Andrew Yang has ever used any of these terms. And so I said it beforehand, and then now Andrew Yang is using the terminology that I have previously described as weasel words. You want to know why I call it weasel words? Because they are weasel words. It gives you enough wiggle room to get out of ever doing any substantive change. He says, instead of saying, I support Medicare for all, I will sign on to that bill, because he says quite literally, I'm not going to sign on to that bill. We need to, quote, move to a Medicare for all system. Move to. What exactly does that mean? We need to move towards it. Hey, if we move towards it and we stop at the halfway point, well, we started moving towards it. So don't get mad at me because we didn't get all the way there. I only said I would move to it. You see how these words are problematic? He says, we need access to affordable quality care. Whenever anybody says access when it comes to healthcare, run for the hills. Because you have access to a Ferrari right now. You have access to a Ferrari. Are you going to get it? Not necessarily. Affordable care. Oh, affordable. That means you're still going to have to pay out of pocket. Anything that's not free at the point of service is not Medicare for all. And Andrew quite literally says, oh, I support copays to, quote, have some skin in the game. Terrible plan. You support copays. Terrible plan. No premiums, no copays, no deductibles. Free at the point of service. That's Medicare for all. So listen, now knowing something about all the different plans, I think the hierarchy is very clear in terms of, you know, whose healthcare plan is best and who else falls in the rankings there. So number one, obviously, is Bernie Sanders. Supports, you know, the Medicare for all bill, the actual bill itself that he wrote or co-wrote. He has the best plan of the presidential candidates. Number two is actually Tulsi Gabbard. Now, Tulsi Gabbard, we went after her because she was also using some of these weasel words and talking about choice and whatnot. But when she released her actual plan, it's not as good as Bernie's. It's not as good as Medicare for all. But it is single payer plus, as she calls it, which is like, okay, everybody can get health care and it's free at the point of service, but you could also get private insurance if you want, but there's no opting out of the single payer system. So we have a single payer system. You pay via taxes. It's free at the point of service. You can't opt out of it. But if you want to get also private insurance, you could also get private insurance. Now, again, that's not as good as Bernie's because you allow for a two-tiered system when you do that. But effectively, it's just the Australian model, which isn't that terrible. Not as good as Bernie's, but still not that bad. And then under Tulsi is Elizabeth Warren. The reason why she's underneath Tulsi is because her approach to getting Medicare for all is the most politically impotent thing I've ever heard in my life. And really, I think it's just, a way to weasel out of getting it at all. Like she says, she's going to pass it in two parts. First, we'll do a public option, and then 3 years later, we'll revisit the fight, and then we'll get Medicare for all. That's totally bogus. That's not going to happen. It's so pie in the sky and naive, or just a ploy to not get it, because she doesn't really support it. But either way, because the approach to implementing it is so bad, and such a clear way to get around actually doing it, she falls in the third place. But at least on paper, she still says after 3 years we'll get there. Okay, so she's number 3. And then number 4, you got to go Yang. But honestly, Mayor Pete's plan might be better than Yang's plan. Seriously, it might be better. You know, you'd have to really go into more of the specifics, but it's not even clear that Yang supports a public option based on what he released. But in the case of Mayor Pete, he does support a public option. So I'll reserve judgment on who falls into that number 4 spot when it comes to their healthcare plans. But Yang's is not good, man. This is not good. And, I know I'm not going to change his mind on Medicare for all because he's a smart guy and I'm sure his mind is made up with whatever position he actually has. But what I would say to him is, for the love of God, stop saying Medicare for all, Medicare for all, Medicare for all. Because you don't believe in it. You don't support it. You quite literally don't sign on to the bills. So you're just trying to use its popularity, because it is really popular. Use its popularity and then cynically redirect people to a plan that's not nearly as strong and doesn't bring nearly as much change. And again, we desperately need Medicare for all in this country to stop the 500,000 medical bankruptcies, to stop the up to 45,000 deaths from lack of health care. We need it so badly. 20, 30 million people uninsured? There are people who are underinsured. We have such a crisis. The prices, cost is through the roof. Only way you really substantively address all this stuff is Medicare for all. But what we have in Yang is a guy who rhetorically uses Medicare for all while literally substantively not supporting the policy and watering it down beyond imagination. Andrew, this is not okay. And I must say, this is the most disappointed I've been in Andrew Yang. Because everything up to this point has been okay, I really I agree with him on a lot of stuff, but I also disagree with him on a lot of stuff. But this is that next step of not only do I disagree with you, you're kind of being dishonest by even saying you support Medicare for all.